I never thought a toy truck could cost someone everything they'd built, but that's exactly what happened the day my nephew crashed his remote control monster truck into my laptop. The screen didn't just crack, it spiderwebbed into 1,000 fragments, each one reflecting back a different version of the last 3 years of my life. I stood there in my brother's living room, watching plastic wheels still spinning against the hardwood floor, and all I could hear was silence. Not the kind of silence that comes before an apology. The kind that comes when people are deciding whose fault this really is, and they've already made up their minds it isn't theirs. My brother Marcus broke that silence with words I'll never forget. So, what if your project is worth billions, Sarah? It's just a computer. Kids don't owe you anything. My mother nodded from the couch, her hand already reaching to comfort my nephew Tyler, who wasn't crying, wasn't sorry, was just looking at me with that blank expression children wear when they know the adults will handle it. My father cleared his throat and said what he always said. Family comes first, sweetheart. You can always rebuild. You're good at that. They were right about one thing. I was good at rebuilding. I'd been rebuilding their mistakes my entire adult life. Let me take you back so you understand how we got here, because this story doesn't start with a broken laptop. It starts 28 years earlier in a small house in Columbus, Ohio, where I learned that being the responsible one meant being invisible until someone needed something. My brother Marcus was born first, loud and demanding, the kind of child who commanded attention just by existing. I came 3 years later, quiet and watchful, the kind of child who learned early that love in our family was a limited resource, distributed based on who made the most noise. Marcus got baseball equipment and birthday parties. I got library cards and handed-down clothes. Marcus got college paid for and came home after 2 semesters. I got academic scholarships and graduated summa cum laude. Marcus got startup money for 3 different business ideas that all failed within a year. I got a job at a consulting firm and sent money home to cover the shortfall when Dad's shop had a slow season. This was the pattern. Marcus was the dreamer, protected and encouraged. I was the doer, expected and forgotten. By the time I turned 30, I'd paid off my parents' second mortgage, covered Marcus's legal fees from a business dispute, and sent my nephew to a private preschool because Marcus said public schools were failing American children. Nobody asked if I could afford these things. They just assumed that because I was successful, I was obligated. That's what family meant in our house. Obligation flowed one direction, from me to everyone else. The laptop that broke that Sunday afternoon wasn't just any laptop. It was a custom-built machine I'd commissioned specifically for the financial modeling software I'd been developing for 3 years. The project had started as a side interest, something I worked on during weekends and late nights after my consulting work was done. I'd always been good with numbers, the kind of good where patterns emerged from chaos, where I could see relationships between data points that other people missed. The software I was building could predict market fluctuations with an accuracy rate that had venture capitalists calling me based on rumors alone. I'd turned down 12 acquisition offers in the last 6 months because I knew what I had was bigger than a quick payout. This wasn't just another app or platform. This was infrastructure-level technology that could change how financial institutions made decisions. The laptop held everything: 3 years of algorithms, testing data, client demonstrations, partnership agreements in progress, and a pitch deck for a series of funding round that would value my company at $800 million. I had backups, of course. I'm not reckless. But what they didn't know, what I'd never told anyone in my family, was that those backups were encrypted with a protocol so secure that without the physical authentication key stored on that laptop's hardware drive, the backups were just expensive digital noise. I'd built the system that way intentionally, because the technology was valuable enough that corporate espionage was a real threat. I'd been cautious. I'd been smart. What I hadn't been was suspicious enough of a 5-year-old with a toy truck. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to Olive Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. The Sunday it happened was supposed to be a normal family dinner, the kind we had twice a month where I showed up with expensive wine and listened to Marcus talk about his latest business idea while my parents nodded encouragingly. This month's idea was a subscription box for artisanal hot sauces, which would have been his fourth subscription box concept and his seventh food-related venture. I'd stopped offering advice years ago because advice was just criticism in disguise, and criticism of Marcus was family betrayal. I'd brought my laptop because I had a video call scheduled with a potential partner in Singapore, and the time zones meant I needed to take it at 7:30, right in the middle of dinner. I'd explained this when I arrived. I'd asked if I could use the study for 20 minutes. My mother had waved her hand dismissively and said I worked too much, that I should learn to be present with family. So I'd set up at the dining room table after we ate, my laptop open, my notes organized, my headphones ready. That's when Tyler came running through with his new toy, the monster truck Marcus had bought him that morning because Tyler had asked for it at the store and Marcus believed children should have their desires met immediately or they'd develop scarcity mindsets. The truck was oversized and fast, controlled by a pistol grip remote that Tyler absolutely did not have the coordination to manage. I saw him coming. I even started to reach for my laptop to move it. But Marcus said, "Let him play, Sarah. You're making him nervous hovering like that." So I pull my hand back. I waited. I trusted that my family wouldn't let something happen to something I clearly valued. The truck hit my laptop at full speed with enough force that the laptop flipped backward off the table and hit the hardwood floor screen first. The sound was crystalline and final, like ice breaking on a pond. Tyler laughed. That's what I remember most clearly. He laughed because crashes are funny when you're 5 and consequences haven't been explained to you yet. I picked up the laptop carefully, the way you'd pick up something broken that might still have sharp edges. The screen was destroyed completely, a mosaic of fractured glass and dead pixels. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I tried the hard reset sequence. Nothing. The entire unit was unresponsive, and even if I could get it to boot, the screen was unusable. I looked at Marcus, waiting for the apology, for the acknowledgement, for the bare minimum of parental responsibility. He was watching me with an expression I'd seen before, the one he wore when he was about to make someone else's problem into their own fault. He said, "Sarah, you shouldn't have left it where he could reach it. Kids are kids. They don't understand value." My mother jumped in immediately, her voice taking on that soothing tone she used when she was about to make something my fault. "Sweetheart, you know Tyler doesn't mean any harm. He's just playing. You can't expect a child to navigate around your work things. Maybe next time you could set up somewhere safer?" I felt something shift inside me then, like a foundational beam cracking under weight it had carried too long. I said, very quietly, "This laptop contains 3 years of work. Irreplaceable work. Work that's worth more than everything in this house combined." That's when Marcus said it, louder than necessary, with that edge of defensiveness that meant he knew he was wrong but would never admit it. "So, what if your project is worth billions, Sarah? It's just a computer. You make good money. Buy another one. Kids don't owe you anything. Family comes first." My father stood up then, putting himself physically between me and Marcus the way he'd done since we were children, as if I were the threat, as if my expecting accountability was the real problem. He said, "Marcus is right. Family comes first. Tyler didn't mean any harm. You're always so focused on work. Maybe this is a sign you need to slow down, spend more time with people instead of machines." I looked at my mother. She was comforting Tyler now, who still wasn't upset, who was just waiting to see if he'd get in trouble or get away with it. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked at Marcus, who had his arms crossed, defensive and righteous. I looked at my father, who had already decided this conversation was over. And I realized something I should have understood years earlier. They didn't see my work as real. To them, my success was just something that happened to me, as natural and unremarkable as height or hair color. They didn't see the hours or the sacrifice or the skill. They saw a resource, something that generated money that could be redirected to family needs, which meant Marcus's needs, which meant their need to keep Marcus happy. My work wasn't fragile to them, because I wasn't fragile to them. I was the strong one, the responsible one. The one who could handle anything and rebuild from nothing, because I'd always done it before. I unplugged my laptop, wrapped the cord around it carefully, and put it in my bag. I said, "I need to go." My mother said, "Don't leave angry, sweetheart. Let's talk about this." But there was nothing to talk about. I could see it in their faces. They'd already decided this was an overreaction, that I was being difficult, that I was prioritizing things over people. They'd already written the story where I was wrong. So I left. I drove back to my apartment in downtown Columbus and sat at my kitchen table with my broken laptop in front of me, trying to calculate the damage. The Singapore call was missed. The partnership was time-sensitive, and missing the call meant signaling unreliability. The authentication key was inaccessible. The backups were useless without it. The pitch meeting was in 6 days. I had no functional device, no accessible data, and no way to rebuild 3 years of work in less than a week. By any reasonable assessment, I'd lost everything. And my family thought I should just buy another computer and get over it. The next morning I called in sick to my consulting job for the first time in 7 years. I didn't trust myself to be around people who expected competence when I felt like I was made of broken glass held together with spite. I sat in my apartment and made a list, the way I always did when problems felt too big to hold in my head at once. The list had 2 columns, what I lost and what they don't know. The first column was long and devastating. The second column had 1 entry. The backup authentication wasn't only on the laptop. There was a secondary key, one I'd created as a failsafe and stored in a safety deposit box at a bank in Cleveland, 2 hours away. I'd never mentioned it to anyone because the entire point of a failsafe is that nobody knows it exists. I'd set it up during a period of paranoia about corporate espionage, imagining scenarios where competitors might break into my apartment or hack my systems. I'd never imagined I'd need it because of a toy truck and a family that didn't think my work mattered. But I had it, which meant I hadn't lost everything. I'd lost time, and I'd lost the illusion that my family respected what I built, but the work itself could be recovered. I didn't tell them. That's the part that surprised me most about my own reaction. My first instinct wasn't to call Marcus and tell him I'd figured it out, that everything was fine, that he didn't need to worry. My first instinct was to stay silent and let them believe what they'd chosen to believe, that I was fragile, that my work was replaceable, that family obligation trumped professional devastation. I wanted them to sit with what they'd done. I wanted them to feel the weight of it. So I didn't call. I didn't text. I got in my car and drove to Cleveland, retrieved the authentication key, and spent the next 4 days in a library using their public computers to access my encrypted backups and rebuild my presentation systems. I worked 18-hour days, barely eating, barely sleeping, running on the kind of focused fury that makes everything else disappear. By the time the pitch meeting arrived, I had everything reconstructed. The Singapore partner had been understanding about the missed call once I explained there'd been a family emergency. The venture capitalists never knew anything had gone wrong. I delivered the pitch flawlessly and got a verbal commitment for series of funding at a valuation of $850 million, even higher than projected. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I felt hollow. My phone had been ringing all week. My mother mostly, a few texts from my father, nothing from Marcus because Marcus never apologized first. I didn't answer. I didn't have the energy to perform gratitude for their concern or to pretend that everything was fine. On Friday evening, a week after the laptop broke, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. She had a key I'd given her years ago for emergencies, and apparently my not answering calls qualified. She let herself in and found me at my kitchen table surrounded by notebooks and backup drives, looking like someone who'd survived something. She said, "Sarah, sweetheart, we've been so worried. Why haven't you answered your phone?" I said, "I've been working." She looked at the mess around me and her face did something complicated, like she was trying to decide whether to be impressed or concerned. She said, "You rebuilt everything? Already?" I said, "I had backups. I always have backups." She sat down across from me, and I could see her recalculating, trying to fit this information into the narrative where I was the victim and they were the supportive family. She said, "Well, that's good. So everything's fine then. No harm done. And that's when I understood we were having two completely different conversations. She thought this was about the laptop. She thought if the work was recoverable, the problem was solved. She didn't understand that the problem was never just the laptop. I said, "Mom, do you know what Marcus's words felt like?" She looked uncomfortable, the way she always did when I try to talk about feelings instead of logistics. She said, "He was just trying to keep things calm. You know how he gets defensive when Tyler's involved." I said, "He told me my work doesn't matter." In front of everyone. And you all agreed. She shook her head quickly. That's not what happened. Nobody said your work doesn't matter. We just said that accidents happen and family should be understanding. I leaned back in my chair and looked at this woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me to be responsible and dependable and self-sufficient, who'd somehow never noticed that all those lessons only went one direction. I said, "When was the last time anyone in this family was understanding about something I needed?" She didn't have an answer. She tried, started a few sentences, but couldn't finish any of them because we both knew the truth. I was the one who understood. I was the one who adjusted. I was the one who made room for everyone else's mistakes and moods and needs. Nobody had ever had to be understanding with me because I'd never asked them to be. She left soon after that, saying we'd talk more when I wasn't so emotional, which was her way of saying when I was ready to agree with her version of events. I locked the door behind her and made another list, this one titled What They Actually Owe Me. It was a financial accounting, cold and precise, of every dollar I'd spent on family obligations over the last 10 years. The second mortgage payoff, $47,000. Marcus's legal fees, $18,000. Tyler's preschool, $26,000 over 2 years. Various emergency loans to my parents that were never repaid, $31,000. Emergency car repairs for Marcus, $4,000. First, last, and security deposit for Marcus's current apartment when he got evicted from the previous one, $6,500. The list went on. By the time I finished, the total was over $140,000, not counting interest or opportunity cost or the value of my time spent solving problems that weren't mine. I'd paid all of it willingly, or at least without complaint, because that's what family did. That's what I'd been taught. But I'd also been taught that family protected each other, that family valued each other's contributions, that family said sorry when they broke things that mattered. Apparently, those lessons only applied to some of us. I spent the weekend thinking about what I wanted, and I realized the answer wasn't an apology. Apologies from people who don't understand what they did wrong are just words to make awkwardness go away. What I wanted was distance. Space. The freedom to build my life without the constant background noise of their needs and expectations. So I started making changes, quietly and systematically, the way I did everything. First, I changed my phone number and only gave the new one to professional contacts. Second, I closed the joint bank account I'd opened with my parents years ago that was supposed to be for family emergencies, but had mostly funded Marcus's emergencies. Third, I contacted my lawyer and had her draft a formal repayment plan for the $140,000, structured as a low-interest loan with reasonable monthly payments. I had her send it via certified mail to both my parents and Marcus. Fourth, I canceled the automatic payments I'd been making on various family expenses, the storage unit where Marcus kept inventory from his failed businesses, the upgraded cable package at my parents' house that I'd added so my dad could watch sports, the family cell phone plan that I'd been covering for 3 years. Fifth, I made an appointment with a moving company. The furniture in Marcus's apartment, the stuff he thought he owned, I'd actually purchased. When he'd gotten evicted, he'd had nothing, and I'd furnished his entire place so Tyler would have somewhere stable to live. The receipts were all in my name. Legally, it was all mine. So I scheduled the movers for a Tuesday afternoon when I knew Marcus would be at his part-time job and Tyler would be at school. I had every legal right to do what I did. The movers were professional and efficient. They had a list of every item I'd purchased. The couch, the dining table, the beds, the television, the kitchen equipment, everything. They packed it methodically and loaded it into their truck, while the building manager watched to make sure everything was documented. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. I'd learned long ago that the most powerful move is the one people don't see coming until it's already done. The movers delivered everything to a storage facility I'd rented under my company's name. I didn't need the furniture. I just needed Marcus to understand that the things he'd taken for granted had always belonged to someone else. Marcus called the old number 47 times that first day. According to the voicemail system, I could still check. My parents called 63 times over the next week. I didn't answer because I had nothing to say yet. I was busy. The series of funding had closed, which meant my company was now officially valued at $850 million, and I had venture capital partners who expected results. I'd quit my consulting job and moved into a new office space, hired my first 3 employees, and started building the infrastructure to scale. I was working 16-hour days and sleeping better than I had in years because every hour I worked was building something that was mine, that nobody could take from me, that nobody could dismiss as less important than a child's playtime. 3 weeks after the movers emptied Marcus's apartment, my father showed up at my office. I don't know how he found the address. I hadn't listed it anywhere public yet, but he walked into our reception area and told my assistant he needed to see me immediately, that it was a family emergency. My assistant, a sharp woman named Jennifer who I'd hired specifically because she didn't take nonsense from anyone, told him he could make an appointment like everyone else. He raised his voice. He said I was his daughter, and he had a right to see me. Jennifer said that rights weren't how professional spaces worked, and if he didn't leave voluntarily, she'd call security. I watched this entire interaction through the glass wall of my office, and I felt something like pride. Not in the conflict, but in the boundary. In someone finally telling my father no. I walked out before security arrived and said I'd handle it. My father looked older than I remembered, or maybe I'd just stopped seeing him clearly years ago. He said, "Sarah, what the hell is going on? You take all of Marcus's furniture. You send us bills for money we thought were gifts. You change your number and disappear? Your mother is beside herself. Marcus is sleeping on the floor with his son. This isn't how family treats each other." I invited him into my office and closed the door. I didn't offer him coffee or a seat. I stood with my arms crossed and said, "You're right. It's not how family treats each other. Family doesn't tell you your work is worthless. Family doesn't let children destroy your property and then blame you for being upset. Family doesn't take and take and take and never once ask if you have anything left to give." He started to interrupt, but I kept going. That furniture was never Marcus's. I have receipts for every single piece. That money was never a gift. Gifts are things people choose to give, not things people are obligated to provide, because everyone else is irresponsible. And my phone number is mine to change whenever I want, especially when the people calling have made it clear they only call when they need something. My father's face went red, the way it always did when someone challenged him. He said, "You're being incredibly selfish. Marcus has a child to think about. Your mother and I are getting older. We need family we can count on." I said, "You had family you could count on. For years. And you treated that family like an ATM with no withdrawal limit. So I closed the account." He said, "This is about the laptop? You're destroying your family over a laptop?" And that's when I realized he still didn't get it, might never get it, because getting it would require him to see me as something other than the support system that kept his preferred child afloat. I said, "This isn't about the laptop, Dad. The laptop was just the moment I stopped pretending that what we had was functional. Do you want to know what this is about? This is about the fact that when my nephew destroyed something I'd spent 3 years building, something worth hundreds of millions of dollars, every single person in that room made it my fault. Nobody protected me. Nobody valued what I'd created. Nobody even said sorry. And when I didn't immediately get over it, I was the problem. So no, this isn't about a laptop. This is about 28 years of being the responsible one and realizing that in this family, responsible just means expendable." He stood there, and I could see him trying to find the angle that would make me back down, the argument that would make me feel guilty enough to restore the previous order. But I'd spent 3 weeks in therapy processing exactly this conversation, and my therapist had been very clear. Guilt only works if you accept the premise that you've done something wrong. I hadn't. So I waited. Finally, he said, Your mother is heartbroken. She thinks she failed as a parent. I said, then maybe she should examine why her daughter would rather cut off her entire family than continue being treated like a resource instead of a person. He said, what do you want, Sarah? An apology?
Fine. I'm sorry.
Marcus is sorry. We're all sorry. Can we move past this now? I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. I said, I don't want an apology, Dad. I want you to leave. He looked shocked, actually shocked, as if he'd never considered I might not want to resolve this. He said, you can't be serious. You're going to throw away your whole family over hurt feelings? I walked to the door and opened it. I said, I'm not throwing anything away. I'm just done being the only one who carries it. If you want a relationship with me moving forward, it's going to be on terms where I'm treated with basic respect. If that sounds unreasonable to you, then you've made my point. He left. He actually left, sputtering about how I'd regret this, how I couldn't just walk away from family, how I was making a huge mistake. Jennifer watched him go and then looked at me and said, Boss, I know it's not my place, but that was the most professionally delivered personal boundary I've ever seen. I laughed for the first time in a month. The letters from my lawyer kept going out, formal and polite, requesting repayment on the loan at $1,000 per month, which was less than what Marcus spent on takeout, but apparently was an unconscionable demand. My parents called the loan harassment. Marcus called it extortion. My mother sent me a 5-page handwritten letter about how money shouldn't come between family and how disappointed she was that I'd turned into someone so cold and calculating. I didn't respond to any of it. I was busy building my company, and it turns out when you're not constantly solving other people's problems, you have an enormous amount of time and energy for your own life. 4 months after the laptop incident, I got a call from an unknown number. I normally wouldn't have answered, but I was waiting for a call from a potential client and thought it might be them. It was my father calling from someone else's phone. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He said, Sarah, I need you to stop being stubborn and listen. The family business is in trouble. Real trouble. We're going to lose the shop if we don't get an infusion of capital in the next 60 days. Your mother and I will lose everything. We need your help. The family business was my father's auto repair shop, the one he'd owned for 35 years, the one Marcus was supposed to take over someday but had shown zero interest in actually learning. I'd heard it was struggling. Customers had been moving to corporate chains, and Dad had refused to modernize or adapt. I said, How much do you need? He said, $200,000. I said, That's a lot of money. He said, You have it. We know you closed that big funding round. This would be nothing to you.
Please, Sarah.
We're desperate. I sat with that for a moment, turning it over. A few months ago, I would have said yes immediately, would have transferred the money that day, would have felt grateful to be needed. Now I said, What's your plan to make sure this doesn't happen again in another year? Silence. Then, what do you mean? I said, I mean, what structural changes are you making to the business model to ensure long-term viability? What's your customer acquisition strategy? How are you differentiating from corporate competitors? What's your digital presence look like? Do you have a business plan I can review? More silence. Then, defensive. Sarah, I've been running this shop since before you were born. I don't need a lecture on business. I said, I'm not lecturing. I'm doing due diligence. If you want me to invest $200,000, I need to see a plan for how that money will be used and what the expected return looks like. That's basic business. He said, This isn't business. This is family. We're not asking for an investment. We're asking for help. And there it was. The fundamental disconnect. To him, my money was family resources, available on demand, no questions asked. To me, especially now, money represented time and effort and value, and giving it away without accountability was how I'd lost $140,000 already. I said, Dad, I'll consider helping under the following conditions. 1. Marcus agrees to go through a certified business management program and takes an active role in modernizing the shop. 2. You provide me with full financial transparency, including all debts, obligations, and expenses. 3. Any money I provide is structured as a loan with a clear repayment schedule and interest rate at market value. 4. I get quarterly reports on business performance. And 5. You make the first payment on the $140,000 you already owe me before we discuss any new financial arrangements. He exploded. He actually yelled into the phone, told me I was heartless, that I was using their desperation to punish them, that I was destroying the family legacy out of spite over a stupid computer. I let him finish. Then I said, very calmly, those are my terms. If they're unacceptable, I wish you the best in finding alternative funding. I have a meeting starting in 2 minutes, so I need to go. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or guilt. From power. From the recognition that I'd finally learned what I should have known all along. No is a complete sentence. The shop closed 3 months later. My parents had to sell the property to pay off business debts and ended up moving into a smaller house on the other side of town. Marcus moved in with them because he couldn't afford his own place without furniture and without someone paying his bills. My mother sent me a final letter saying I could have saved them, but chose not to, that she'd never forgive me for abandoning family when they needed me most, that I was dead to her. I read it twice and then filed it away in a folder labeled family correspondence that I might look at someday when it didn't feel like touching a hot stove. My therapist said grief was normal even when you're grieving people who are still alive. I said it didn't feel like grief. It felt like relief. 6 months after that, my company's technology got acquired by a major financial institution for $1.2 billion. My personal payout was $430 million after taxes. The press release went out on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, I had messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in a decade, all of them congratulating me, all of them mentioning various financial hardships in their lives. My mother called from my father's phone. I recognized the number. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail saying she'd always believed in me, that she was proud of me, that family was forever and surely we could move past old disagreements now that I was in a position to really help people. I deleted it without finishing. Marcus sent an email, the first direct communication I'd had from him since the laptop incident. The subject line was congratulations and an olive branch. The body of the email was 3 paragraphs about how he'd always known I'd be successful, how family was more important than pride, how Tyler asked about his Aunt Sarah sometimes, and wouldn't it be nice to rebuild our relationship now that the past was behind us. There was no apology, no acknowledgement, just an assumption that my success meant everything else was forgiven. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I did something I'd been planning since the day the funding closed. I started a foundation, fully funded with $50 million of my own money, dedicated to supporting women in STEM fields who came from families that didn't understand or value their work. The foundation provided scholarships, mentorship, legal resources for women dealing with family financial exploitation, and emergency grants for women whose families had sabotaged their education or careers. I named it the Second Backup Foundation because sometimes the family you're born with fails, and you need a backup plan. The press coverage was extensive.
Forbes did a profile.
TechCrunch called it one of the most innovative philanthropy models in the industry. My mother saw it. I know she did because she sent another letter, this one asking why I could give $50 million to strangers, but couldn't help my own family. I framed that letter and hung it in my office as a reminder of exactly why the foundation existed. I'm 32 now. I run a venture capital firm that specifically invests in companies founded by people from complicated family backgrounds, people who built something from nothing because they had to because nobody else was going to do it for them. I'm successful by any measure, financially secure, professionally respected, personally content. I live alone in a condo downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and no photos of my family anywhere. Sometimes people ask if I regret cutting them off, if I miss them, if I think I overreacted. The answer is complicated.
I don't miss the people they were.
I miss the people I needed them to be. I don't regret protecting myself. I regret that protection was necessary. And I don't think I overreacted. I think I reacted proportionally to 28 years of being undervalued, and it just looked extreme because I'd been underreacting for so long. The laptop was never about the laptop. It was about a 5-year-old being allowed to destroy something valuable because the adults in the room had decided that my work, my time, my contribution wasn't real in the way their needs were real. It was about my brother shouting that my project being worth billions didn't matter because it was just a computer, as if the value was in the machine and not in what I'd built. It was about my family choosing, in that moment and in every moment that followed, to protect their comfort over my dignity. And it was about me finally choosing myself. The broken laptop is in my office now on a shelf, still cracked, still non-functional. People ask why I keep it. I tell them it's a reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve, even when everyone you love is telling you you're asking for too much. Especially then. Because family isn't supposed to be about obligation and extraction. It's supposed to be about mutual respect and protection, and showing up for each other, not just when it's convenient, but when it costs something. And if the people who raised you can't manage that basic standard, then the problem isn't that you walked away. The problem is that walking away was the healthiest option you had left. I built backups because I knew the work was vulnerable. I just didn't know the biggest threat would come from inside my own family. But that's the thing about being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one everyone counts on. You learn to prepare for disasters. You learn to protect what matters. And eventually, if you're lucky and exhausted enough, you learn that sometimes what matters most is protecting yourself.